Among comic book superheroes, Spider-Man definitely has one of the most interesting rogues galleries of all. And without many of us realizing it, these supervillains have already made live-action appearances across the many Marvel-related movies and TV shows. Let's look at all of them one by one. In Spider-Man Homecoming, the major villain is Adrian Toomes, aka Vulture. With the help of a high-tech flying suit, he's able to pose a real threat to Spider-Man with his aerial maneuvers. And prior to that, Vulture's wings made a cameo appearance at the end credits of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, hidden inside the Oscorp building. Another Spider-Man Homecoming villain is Tinkerer, an engineering genius who is able to create gadgets and weaponry from basically anything. In the comics, he's usually under the employ of other supervillains, supplying them with gadgets for their personal vendetta against Spider-Man. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 gave us Dr. Otto Octavius, Peter's mentor who descended into madness, becoming Dr. Octopus. His metallic tentacle arms also appeared at the end credits of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 alongside Vulture's wings. Sandman was one of the three main villains in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3, who gained his sand powers from a freak accident. Sandman sort of appears in Spider-Man Far From Home, but this time as one of the four elementals, as a monster who controls Earth. And now that we've mentioned the elementals, we're going to have to elaborate about them more. In Spider-Man Far From Home, they were fake illusions created by Mysterio, appearing as monsters made of fire, earth, water, and wind. In the comics, the original elementals were these ancient humanoids with mystical control over the elements. But later issues would introduce other elemental supervillains who become more known among fans. They are Cyclone, Hydro Man, Sandman, and Molten Man, and clearly the designs of the elementals seen in Far From Home are more based on these villains. Moving on, you probably remember the one-armed Dr. Kurt Connors, the scientist who became Lizard in The Amazing Spider-Man 1, a result of cross-species experimentation gone wrong. Dr. Kurt had in fact already made an appearance in the Raimi trilogy as Peter's professor at Empire State University. But for some reason they made this one-armed guy a physicist instead of a biologist. Maxwell Dillon, electrical engineer, the main villain in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, who gained powers from a freak accident, like most Spidey villains. The overpowered high-voltage villain is set to appear in the MCU's third Spider-Man film, played by the very same actor again, Jamie Foxx, one of the very few actors to do so, reprising the exact same role in a different cinematic universe. Mac Gargan appeared in Spider-Man Homecoming as one of the criminals taken down by Spider-Man. He has a scorpion tattoo on his neck, referencing his comic book counterpart Scorpion, a villain who gained superhuman abilities from an experiment and is forced to contain himself in an ugly green scorpion suit. Alexei Sitsevich used a large walking rhino-shaped battle armor in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but his rhino comic book counterpart is actually already a giant of a man himself, who was granted superhuman strength from an artificial skin covering. Combined with super speed and super durability, he's almost unstoppable once he starts charging. As seen in Spider-Man Homecoming, the main shocker is Herman Schultz, who, like his comic book counterpart, uses a gauntlet that emits powerful electric shock blasts. In that movie, he picks up where Jackson Bryce left off after he got killed. Jackson Bryce, aka Montana, is another Shocker alter ego in different comic book versions. Wilson Fisk, or Kingpin. Nowadays many people know him as Daredevil's enemy, but he's originally an adversary of Spider-Man. We haven't seen him go against Spider-Man in any live-action media yet, but the powerful crime lord has appeared way back in the 80s Trial of the Incredible Hulk, the Daredevil movie in 2003, and the Netflix Daredevil series. Green Goblin, a persona used by both Norman and Harry Osborn, chemically induced super strength combined with high-tech gadgets and weaponry makes this gliding menace a serious threat to Spider-Man. The Osborn father and son are seen in the original Raimi Spider-Man movies, as well as Mark Webb's The Amazing Spider-Man 2. But Norman Osborn in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was bedridden, and although he never became the villain Green Goblin, he was suffering from a disease that gave him a goblin-like appearance, with scaly skin, rashes, and clawed hands. And speaking of Norman Osborn, we also have his personal assistant, who's also a villain, Donald Menken. In The Amazing Spider-Man 2, he assumes the role of Oscorp's CEO after Norman dies. Next is Black Cat, who is both a friend and foe to Spider-Man in the comics. And yes, Felicia Hardy has already made a live-action appearance, but without assuming her Black Cat role. In The Amazing Spider-Man 2, she is shown doing honest work at Oscorp, but we know that she definitely must be scheming something secretly. Eddie Brock, the journalist with a personal vendetta against Spider-Man and host to a black alien symbiote, making him Venom. But in Spider-Man 3, he's more of a freelance photographer, but still hates Spider-Man. In the Venom movie, he's a video journalist and Spider-Man is nowhere to be seen yet. And at the very end of that Venom movie, we are introduced to serial killer Cletus Cassidy, who we all know is Carnage in the comics. He'll have a more important role in the Venom sequel, where he's gonna bond with his own red alien symbiote. Spider-Man Homecoming gave us Aaron Davis, the criminal uncle of Miles Morales, who in the comics is Prowler. His Spider-Man Homecoming incarnation is depicted as a low-level criminal felon with a sense of morality. Behind the deaths of Peter Parker's parents are these two brothers, Gentleman and Finisher, both shown in the Amazing Spider-Man film series. The gentleman in the shadows is Gustav Fiers, a criminal mastermind who uses his assassin brother Carl to finish off the Parkers. There's also the Ultimate Spider-Slayer, who in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is only shown to be a supervisor at Oscorp, Alistair Smith. In the comics, he carries on the legacy of hating Spider-Man from his father and developed a bio-organic armor with jutting blades to slay Spider-Man. And then there's Dr. Michael Morbius, or just Morbius the Living Vampire. He's gonna appear in his own movie, a genius scientist who tries to cure himself from a rare blood disease but gets turned into a vampire as a side effect. You probably don't remember this one. Mendel Strom, an Oscorp scientist in the first Raimi Spider-Man film, who died at the hands of Norman Osborn. In the comics, he returns back to life as the Robot Master. Randy Vale was one of the minor members of Vulture's team in Spider-Man Homecoming, who got arrested without much action. In the comics, however, Vale dons a technologically advanced costume and takes the name Darter. Okay, now John Jameson here isn't really a villain, and Raimi Spider-Man 2 just showed him as a regular astronaut who's in love with Mary Jane. But in the source material, one of his space travel adventures caused him to get inflicted with a condition that turns him into a feral man-wolf. Unable to control himself, he clashes with Spider-Man. Punisher is more of an anti-hero instead of villain. In the early comics, Frank Castle was initially an antagonist of Spider-Man. His live-action version is seen in 3 separate movies since 1989, plus his own loosely MCU-related Netflix TV show. As of right now, Kraven the Hunter, aka Sergei Kravinov, has yet to make a live-action appearance. although part of his famous spear is shown in the end credits of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, teasing a Sinister 6 movie that eventually never happened. Apart from Harry Osborn, Ned Leeds is another friend of Peter Parker who assumes a goblin identity in the original source material. In the MCU, however, it's still too early to assume that Ned would ever become Hobgoblin given his physique, but the actor's latest transformation, however, could hint that it might be happening. Now, Mysterio is a bit of a complicated thing. Bruce Campbell, who made varying appearances throughout all three of the Raimi trilogy movies, was slated to become Mysterio in the cancelled fourth film, and all of those roles he's been playing would just be part of the act, an illusion or disguise of sorts. Then in the reboot in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, we get to see part of Mysterio's mask in the end credits. Yes, it's confirmed that that's Mysterio's mask, not Chameleon's. And in the latest reboot, we finally do get a proper Mysterio. The MCU version of Quentin Beck uses advanced technology to create realistic holograms instead of the traditional smokes and mirrors and stuff. Now, many people missed this, but Dimitri, the bus driver in Spider-Man Far From Home, is the MCU's version of Chameleon, who is usually depicted as a master of disguise, known for his ability to impersonate anybody. We don't know yet what his MCU story is, whether he's already in disguise or just a regular S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. Now let's talk a bit about other Spider-Man enemies who aren't really supervillains, just regular people. There's Uncle Ben's killer, who in the comics was simply known as the Burglar. We see two versions of him in Raimi's Spider-Man 1 and The Amazing Spider-Man 1, both of whom Peter passively watched as they committed a crime, only to have them murder Uncle Ben later. Then we have Peter's high school bully. Flash Thompson was the typical brute in the first two versions, abusing Peter physically, but the latest version, the MCU one, shows a more modern depiction of a bully who relies more on words and slander to hurt Peter. And last of all, we have J. Jonah Jameson, who does everything to discredit Spider-Man. The Daily Bugle editor is played by the same actor in both the Raimi trilogy and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which makes a first for a Spider-Man related character. So I guess that's pretty much everything. In case we did miss anything, let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching and goodbye.